I am excited to talk about restoring the sunflower star to save the kelp, community-based approach to restoring sunflower stars. And a bit about me in terms of how I ended up working with this really cool marine invertebrate. In 2021, just as I was finishing my master's in fisheries and aquatic sciences, 12 years into a professional career as a public aquarium aquarist. I finished my master's in looking at facilitating sunflower sea star recovery through public aquarium engagement. And I met Vince, who is up here in the group photo on the far right. And he said he was going to start a sunflower star laboratory because he was inspired or just concerned about the loss of sea stars and the changes of the kelp forest that he was seeing in his backyard in Monterey. And we started the Sunflower Star Lab with the people that you see before you. But prior to that, I did have a background in aquaculture, managing live foods and supporting fish and invertebrate cultures through public aquariums, as well as being a scientific diver and working on other recovery programs, which inspired me and gave me the confidence to jump into sunflower sea star restoration. So that was with Acropora corals in the Caribbean and the white abalone restoration program in SoCal. And I love being underwater, and that's me doing a survey in Washington last October, looking for young and Lear rockfish and little baby sunflower sea stars. So the Sunflower Star Lab is a Monterey-based nonprofit committed to restoring sunflower stars and bringing kelp balance back to our kelp forests. It is a 501(c)(3), and we just moved from our proof of concept lab into our new laboratory facility in Moss Landing, California. And part of my job, or my primary part of my job, is working with not just the Sunflower Star Lab, but collaborating with all of the partners in California and beyond, with the Pycnopodia Recovery Working Group and the public aquariums to bring about the best practices for moving different objectives of recovery planning forward. But before we get into all of that, I just want to make sure that everyone knows just how cool the sunflower sea stars are and what they're related to and what happened to them and why do we care. If you do not know, the sunflower sea star's scientific name is Pycnopodia helianthoides. Along the West Coast, they've kind of got the nickname Pycnos just because they're a very popular star that people love. They're the biggest sea star you'll ever come across in normal diving limits. They are the largest by volume, and they're about 3 feet or more. I just saw the largest sunflower sea star at the Aquarium du Québec in Canada just last month. It was almost 1.5 meters across. It just blew my mind how big these individuals get. And they are related to other sea stars, brittle stars, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, and crinoids, which are all echinoderms. So they're all marine invertebrates. And you can find all of them on the West Coast here and globally, but for Pycnopodia helianthoides specifically, they exist from Baja all the way to Alaska. Now, some general very cool things about sunflower sea stars that are also found in sunflower sea stars, are these mouths are on the bottom of them, and they can invert their stomachs, which this sea star had to be flipped over to demonstrate that that's what they do, so that they can eat their prey externally, or they can bring them into their body and dissolve them and then slurp up their food that way. They also have eyes. That little red spot on the bottom picture is sort of a primitive eye that can see light and dark, and it's on the tip of every single arm. So for a sunflower sea star that can have up to 24 arms, they will have an eye on the tip of every single arm. And similarly, for all of their organs, like their gonads and digestive system, they are replicated in every single arm. It's all has all the same stuff in there. So if they lose one arm, they're not missing a particularly important part of their body. And the pedicelaria, which are these little white spots that you'll see, are little rosettes, sometimes even smaller pedicelaria. They actually are little pincers that, when they were originally discovered in sea stars, they thought, and they also have, they are modified in different species and also found on urchins. They thought that they were like a parasitic or some other organism living on the surface of the stars, but they're actually part of the sea star, and they kind of help. They have a couple hypothesized functions, either for clearing debris from the surface, or moving things just around the surface of their bodies, and then moving the actual animal. They have thousands of tube feet. So pycnopodia means dense feet, and this genus of stars has twice the number of tube feet per row, which distinguishes them from other sea stars. So that's how they got their name. And they do have quite a lot of tube feet. There's no head or tails to a sea star. Really, whichever direction that they're moving in is forwards, and whatever direction that they're leaving is the back of them. But they really can move in any direction that they need to go in. And specifically with the sunflower sea star, they are the fastest in terms of marine invertebrates. And they can move like several meters per minute, which for a sea star with no brain is pretty good. And it makes them very effective predators. And the papillae are they're, for sunflower sea stars, I describe them as fluffy. Like they don't have a lot of skeletal infrastructure. They've lost a lot of that. You wouldn't see them as a dried souvenir, which shouldn't be something that you should strive to collect if you're going to a souvenir shop. But they really don't have that really strong endoskeleton that you would see in bat stars or ochre stars. And they're very fluffy. When you pick them up out of the water, if you have to handle them for scientific purposes, they just kind of flop over and have lots of papillae, which are actually parts of their internal coelomic vessels that are allowing for waste products or minerals and gases to diffuse outside of the animal. So the life cycle of a sunflower sea star, many people might not realize that they have a very interesting life cycle with their larval stages being quite different looking from the tiny little juveniles you might see if you're tide pooling, or if you're lucky enough to spot them in the wild subtidally while scuba diving. But sunflower sea stars are have male and female, but you can't distinguish them just by looking at them. They don't really have any size differences that we've been able to note. But they will spawn closely next to each other to ensure fertilization. One will release, males will release eggs, either females will release, or males release sperm, females release eggs. And over several days, the fertilized egg will develop into a larval bipinnate stage, which is going to feed in the plankton and float in the current while it develops. And this, so D and E are the bipinnate stages. And then as it develops and eats and gets more energy, it will develop into a brachylaria larvae, where this is sort of like the terminal stage of the larvae, where it will develop different characteristics to allow it to settle onto the seafloor and metamorphose into a 5-armed sea star. So the cool thing is that the larval stage, they are biradially symmetric, like you and I. They have a left and a right side, and that's how they live in the plankton. They have a mouth where the letter M is. They feed on microalgae, and then they have arms and the rudiment. The rudiment develops, you can see like a little helmet on the bottom of it. That actually, those little bumps on the bottom of figure G is actually the juvenile sea star that's getting ready to, then when it settles, it will reabsorb that huge larval body, which is about huge, meaning like it's a 2 to 3 millimeter larval individual, and it will absorb all of that larval body that you can kind of see in H. It will suction to a surface, whether it's, you know, the seagrass or kelp or Christos coralline algae, and metamorphose in over a day or two, again, depending on temperature and conditions, into a 5-armed, so it will be radially symmetric sunflower sea star. So that's a big metamorphosis, and that's about 0.5 millimeter in size, 0.5 to 1 millimeter in size. Again, that depends on sort of the fitness of the larvae as it goes into this settlement stage. And as it grows, they're immediately going to turn into sea stars that are searching for other marine invertebrates to eat. They can eat newly settled urchins or mussel spat right off the bat. And they'll continue to grow as from little 5-armed stars into larger and larger stars, adding arms as they go in no particular just sometimes they can settle with 4 arms, sometimes with 5, and they'll immediately grow a 6th arm. Sometimes they'll be like a 2 or 5 millimeters before they start growing a 6th arm or 7th arm, but eventually they'll keep adding them until they are around 3 years, at which point they are believed to be sexually mature. And this was recently confirmed through Jason Hoden up at Friday Harbor Labs, that has been conducting full life cycle studies of this animal and was able to spawn F1 generation, so animals that were settled and grown up in the lab, so we know exactly how old they are, and they were able to settle them at 3 years or when they were about like dinner plate size. So that was the first that happened just this year. So very exciting work. And they can live up to 30 years or more, but we don't know exactly how old they are, because all the ones that have been or are currently held in public aquariums that have been collected from openings of aquariums, some of them we haven't lost yet. And so we don't know exactly how old they can live, but roughly speaking, 30 or more years. So a lot of the generational work we still have to figure out. So where do we find sunflower sea stars? Pretty much everywhere. You can find them in kelp forests, in eelgrass beds, and in soft bottom substrate, rocky bottom substrate. Most commonly, they're found intertidally to around 100 feet or 30 meters, but they can also be pulled up in fishing traps several hundred meters down. But they're very rare at that depth. And they eat pretty much anything that they can catch, primarily depending on the predominant marine invertebrate species in the area. They'll eat whatever's most abundant. Usually those are mussels, snails, or urchins. But if they can catch a fish, they'll try to eat it. If there's observational evidence of a sunflower sea star eating an octopus, just all sorts of crazy things. I mean, they're huge animals, so if they can grab it and keep a hold of it, they'll try to eat it. And also abalone, which is a great discussion point. So keystone predators is a title that we want to give to the sunflower sea star because of their recent studies, like looking at just how much of an effect they can have on ecosystems. The dynamic between urchins and kelp and sunflower sea stars was really the greatest experiment of all. Sort of happened in the last decade in 2013, when the sunflower sea star wasting syndrome coincided with a warm weather event, the blob, and an El Nino event, which created this perfect storm of dieback of kelp, so loss of food for the urchins, dieback of predators, which caused urchins to proliferate, and sort of see what happens when you remove a predator from an environment in a very quick amount of time. Within the first year in 2014, there have been no observed sightings of sunflower sea stars in Southern California. The last observed sunflower sea star in Central California was in 2018. And in Northern California, they've been just very rarely observed, as in one or two between 2018 and 2022. But in the last few years, we've seen a dozen or so in Northern California. So exactly how these sea stars impact the kelp, and how the different life stages can be integrated back into the kelp forest ecology, is sort of where hoping to bring together all the researchers who are looking at the behavioral ecology, the predator-prey interactions, and how kelp dynamics all sort of recreate a mosaic that could be more sustainable than what we're seeing now in Northern California. So the kelp forests are important because they provide food for over 1,000 different species of organisms, and they prevent coastal erosion by mitigating wave action, and they support ecotourism and fisheries, as well as sequestering carbon. And roughly half of the oxygen in the atmosphere is produced by photosynthetic marine organisms that include kelp. And they have been coined the sequoias of the sea, that are vital ecosystems that we in California are lacking a bit these days, particularly in Northern California. This is a picture of a giant kelp forest in Monterey, California, and a beautiful picture of a nice, healthy kelp canopy. So when the sunflower sea stars disappeared due to sea star wasting, it was very fast. The sunflower sea stars in Southern California and Central California and Baja was 100% and remains 100% loss. 99.5% in Northern California and Oregon, similar losses. Very little, if no reports on the coastal Washington side, whereas in the Salish Sea and the inland waters, there's still some remaining. The numbers as we get further north, the sea star wasting event did affect all areas where you find sunflower sea stars. The confidence of the numbers are a little bit more ambiguous up in the northern reaches, since there was just not as much data available to compare pre and post wasting events. So there's definitely some tricky assessments up in Alaska, but needless to say, looking at the global trend, there was a huge loss of sunflower sea stars throughout their range. And the pictures below show you sort of what a wasted sea star looks like. There's not really much left of them once a wasting event strikes an area. We are talking specifically about sunflower sea stars, but the sunflower sea star wasting event did affect dozens of sea star species up and down the coast. So sea star wasting is not a new syndrome. It's been observed in many different countries where sea stars exist. It's been observed in California many times before and documented, but not to the scale in terms of its region, and also not to the number of different different stars that were affected. So this huge amount of stars that were affected, they're not, there wasn't a lot of research going on with sea star wasting prior to this event, but it definitely caught the attention of marine invertebrate disease ecologists, and some of the top researchers in the world have been trying to figure out exactly what the cause of sea star wasting is. And back in 2014, there was a paper that came out within sort of the year of this wasting event, saying that it was an associated densovirus with sunflower sea stars, but it wasn't able to be replicated in other labs. And now it's been sort of a decade-long search to really nail down what the causes are, what stressors either induce or don't induce these symptoms. And really wasting, you can think of it as, if you're, it may not all be the same thing that's causing these symptoms in all these species and in all these regions. There was a marine heat wave, but it affected animals that were very deep water in cooler regions, and in very warm waters in, areas with different freshwater runoff from, farmland effluents, which may have affected different amount of nitrates or just fresh water and mineral runoff. So there's no smoking gun. There's a lot still that we're trying to figure out about the syndrome. But essentially in California, they are functionally extinct, even though we do have a couple sightings in Northern California. It just means that there aren't enough of them to provide an ecological role in, say, kelp forests and keeping urchin numbers at bay. And this is sort of what it would look like between a kelp forest and a barren. You have sort of everything has been eaten away. The little stipes that are left are sort of just without any fronds and aren't really doing anything. They can't reproduce. The kelp is sort of non-functional. So who eats sea urchins, and how are the kelp forests being affected by the loss of sunflower sea stars? Sunflower sea stars eat urchins. In Southern California, we've got lobster and sheephead that eat urchins, and in Monterey Bay, we've got southern sea otters. But what's happened to all these predators and urchins over the course of the last few hundred years? Well, 150 or more years ago, the sea otters were hunted to near extinction, and in Central California, notably through the Monterey Bay Aquarium's sea otter restoration program, they've been back, and they've been there for several decades. And then there have been a few restoration efforts in Southern California, and most recently this year there are a few sightings in the Channel Islands of some bachelor otters that are coming back, but again, they're not widespread in Southern California. But 10 years ago, all the sunflower sea stars disappeared, and the Southern California fisheries rely heavily on lobster as a recreational and commercial catch, and sheephead are also fishery down in Southern California, but they still have other predators of urchins to rely on in Southern California. But if you notice, Northern California, they lost both the primary urchin predators, being southern sea otters and Pycnopodia, and they now have lost 96% of their kelp forest in Northern California. This is a really interesting graph from Southern California in the Northern Channel Islands, where it's really the confluence of water coming from the north, and all these 5 different islands have very unique ecosystems and marine ecosystems. And Reuven Bank and Scott Gabera, who work at the Channel Island National Park, put together an interesting long-term monitoring comparison of size and density in and outside of marine protected areas of all the different predators of purple urchins, as well as kelp, to see how the changes over the last few years have affected these different dynamics. Because they're a great little study site for looking at these interactions. There was in San Miguel, which is the furthest west or the most exposed to northern waters, there the sea stars were in some abundance and then went to 0, and you can see the urchin numbers going up, but the giant kelp also disappeared sort of in that same time frame, or were negatively impacted in terms of their number of kelp from the onset of the sea star wasting and the warm weather blob that sort of came over our west coast from 2014 to 2016. So these are just anecdotal observations from long-term monitoring sites in the Channel Island National Park. So again, what happens when urchins, again, naturally occurring native species, go out of balance? They unfortunately have great life histories that or behaviors that allow them to persist regardless of the presence or absence of food. And you might have heard zombie urchins thrown around in news articles, and they do act somewhat like zombies in that they don't really die when they just eat all the food. They have their Aristotle's lantern, or their really sharp beak that they have on the bottom of them. They can just scrape away really at any biofilm that grows on the rock. Once they come out of hiding from their rock crevices, when the food is abundant, the kelp fronds will break off and fall into these crevices, and they can basically get, delivery pizza right to their door, and they don't have to leave their home. And that's great for them because they don't have to encounter any predators. But when their food disappears and there are no predators, they start wandering out onto the ocean floor and just eat everything in their sight. And you can see them all over the ocean floor and climbing up this kelp stipe, and just in a matter of days, they'll have devoured everything. And it's not their fault. They just have an ecosystem that's out of balance right now. And this urchin barren ecosystem just doesn't support the diversity of fish and inverts that a kelp forest would. So we're seeing these have knock-on effects with fisheries and just general recruitment and biomass in our ocean. So what have we been doing since 2018? There's been a group of Pycnopodia recovering working group specialists that encompass everything from the disease ecologists, behavioral ecologists, aquaculture specialists, larval echinoderm specialists, cryopreservationists, animal welfare, and handling experts to develop a way to restore this species. Regardless of the extent of which the species can have an impact on kelp forests or whatever ecosystem they're found in, they definitely have a purpose. And we are looking to answer questions regarding how exactly they are purposeful and how we can restore them. So this is a little montage of a few of our collaborators from public aquariums who've been working on just back of house echinoderm culture. A lot of these facilities have staff that are there long-term that have lots of knowledge with other species that they've raised that they can apply to echinoderms, and working with aquaculture specialists like Andrew Kim here in the bottom on at Moss Landing Marine Labs, who has experience with culturing many different animals and kelp. We have cryopreservationists that are looking at working on cryopreservation of sperm and larvae, as well as Jason Hoden here with his research team up at Friday Harbor Labs, looking at finding all the different bottlenecks and life history traits of this species to try to perfect or advance the success in culturing these species so that they can be used for research to better understand how these animals behave at different life stages, to understand life stages and their growth, as well as use this as a building block for scaling up aquaculture for restoration. So 10 years later, this is 2023, we have a little snapshot, for this is in 2023 till now. We currently have sunflower sea stars at these facilities listed. Before you, historically, there were many other institutions that held sunflower sea stars because they were ubiquitous and found, easily collected right off their shores, or collected by professional collectors and sent to aquariums inland. But now this is a representation of the facilities that have broodstock, so reproductive adults in the star shape, and dots that are juveniles that were raised from this year's collective efforts from public aquariums and marine labs to learn how to raise larvae based off larvae and juveniles based off of Jason Hoden's 5 years of work. And all of this is guided by the roadmap to recovery for the sunflower sea star. This was a huge collective effort of state and federal agencies, academic, nonprofit, and aquarium partners that put together 7 primary objectives that would need to be, and action items that would need to be addressed in order to come up with a recovery plan. So we've been following that as a roadmap and collaborating with all of the dedicated researchers and community members that have been out in the field observing recruitment in the wild, as well as researchers doing the behavioral studies up in Alaska and British Columbia, and Washington, where they're still there and able to do this work. And then really working in California to focus on a state recovery plan and building up the institutional knowledge and collaboration in order to look at California recovery objectives and how that would all fold into already ongoing plans for kelp restoration, and all those collaborators that are already making great strides in kelp restoration. So the Sunflower Star Lab, as I said, was initiated in 2021, and it's been an incredible 2 years where we've been able to build up our nonprofit, be able to tie into the Picno Recovery Working Group, develop a Association of Zoo and Aquarium SAFE program, which is their conservation arm. So now we have a partnership with the public aquariums that have sunflower sea stars broodstock in human care in California. And because of that, we've been able to work with specialists that have experience in growing urchins. Like, this is urchins and sea stars, they grow really slowly. They were so abundant, nobody really needed to culture them before. But now we are, now there's a whole group of people who are very interested in advancing not just sunflower sea stars, but echinoderm culture in general, which is beneficial for conservation, but also has applications for commercial aquaculture, avenues as well. And in this last year, we were able to bring together all the Picno Recovery Working Group partners prior to the Western Society of Naturalists Conference in Monterey in November 2023. And it's a group of people that have met mostly online in Zooms or compartmentalized sort of at different conferences, but we were able to bring everyone together. And just in case you're wondering what hand sign they're making, they are doing the now internationally recognized sunflower sea star scuba sign. So it's this little sunflower sea star sign, if you see one. And I'm pretty sure if anyone is a scuba diver and passionate about sunflower sea stars, screaming is also a very good, solid underwater sign for sunflower sea stars, and some dancing too. In addition, Sunflower Star Lab hosted a echinoderm academy at the Friday Harbor Lab up in Washington just a few weeks ago, and it brought together all the participants who attempted to raise the larvae and grow them into juveniles, and sort of troubleshoot and share our successes and failures to help better our objectives overall. We had 17 aquarists and scientists join us, and it was another great workshop to network and meet everyone who's working on sunflower sea stars in North America. We had Canada represented, and Washington, California, Nebraska, and Illinois represented, and Portugal, because there is one adult Pycnopodia at the aquarium in Lisbon. And below is a little video of juvenile or larval late stage Brachylaria larvae at Moss Landing Marine Labs. This is courtesy of Andrew Kim, who gave a previous kelp culture talk on bull kelp culture, but he also does Pycnopodia culture, which is very cool. They have just an incredible larval stage with those really, really long noodly arms. And the reason why California has any sunflower sea star larvae to work with was due to the collaborative efforts of the Sunflower Star Lab and the public aquariums in California to be able to spawn sunflower stars at the Birch Aquarium and then distribute the larvae to our partners in California. So the sea stars that are being raised in California currently are all from a spawn that happened coincidentally on February 14th, otherwise known as Valentine's Day. So this is the Cupid cohort, and we have had success at all institutions to settle the larvae and raise them up. And this is primarily just this is not for restoration. At this point, it was merely to have all these institutions have the ability to try it out. Again, this is a lot of researchers work with echinoderm embryos, but not really through their full life cycle. So it was a really exciting opportunity this year that is allowing us to have conversations with the state and working with other researchers that are testing out restoration plans in other states. We're able to talk, we're in the beginning stages of talking with our California partners, which include California Fish and Wildlife, to sort of look at what the next steps are in order to look at reintroduction trials, and if that's a viable solution for, accelerating kelp recovery, or even just having sunflower sea stars back in California. So there's a lot of discussions and modeling going on behind the scenes. So there are lots of things that we're actively working on. again, the disease is still, or the syndrome is still something that we're trying to better understand. Is it the same? Is wasting the same in California or not? Is it always disease? Can it just be stress related? There are lots of discussions on that, which aquariums are really well poised to get samples from. We have researchers that have done all the analysis for any broodstock we have in human care to track the diversity that we have currently, with hopes to collect genetic samples from animals in the wild in Northern California and Oregon to sort of compare the genetic diversity between wild and currently held populations in human care, and that will, help advise restoration planning in the future. We're definitely really working on aquaculture methods and scaling methods and looking at the feasibility of different procedures. And reintroduction methods for sure is all sort of like all being discussed and progressing now. Monitoring this starting sort of this year in Northern California. We're trying to get some days where we're going to go out and hopefully find some sea stars up in Northern California for genetic sampling. But for any of you who are listening, who are tide pool enthusiasts or scuba divers, whether you're active with Reef Check already or not, we really want to spread the word to make sure that if you see a sunflower sea star, that you are logging it on iNaturalist or Marine, which is a UC Santa Cruz tracking system that started up during the wasting event in 2023. But these are great resources to log any sunflower sea stars that you see, or if you're just tide pooling, whether you're in Southern California and there's not unlikely to have sunflower sea star here, just to track any wasting events that you see, because there's still active wasting that's observed that we're tracking in different areas so that we can better understand what the causes or correlations are with different sites or time of year that we're seeing. So the more data that volunteers and concerned community participants can provide, the better. And you can donate to our lab. That's a QR code to Sunflower Star Lab.